All right. Hello. Let's get started. Let's get into Shakespeare's writing, considering his verse and his language. I want to get into a little bit of nitty gritty with you as we explore Shakespeare's play because his poems are written in verse. And so it's really important for us to look at what that means, what that looks like, so that we can enjoy the experience even more, but then also so that we can have a little bit more to focus on and analyze. So let's talk about our feet, shall we? Or Shakespeare's feet or foot. And what this refers to is the units used in poetry. And a foot in poetry is composed of syllables. And the syllables are arranged in some kind of pattern that is usually accented or unaccented. And when we talk about scanning or scansion, that has to do with the process of determining the prevailing foot in a line of poetry or determining the types and sequence of different feet in a poem. Now, there are 5 most commonly used sets of feet. You've got the I am, that is unstressed, stressed, such as in the words afraid, the sky. You've got trochaic or trochee, which would be stressed and then unstressed, such as with the word freedom. Free is stressed, dumb is unstressed. Heaven, so you can see how it's a little different. Afraid, freedom. We've got anapestic or anapest, and that would be 2 unstressed syllables followed by a stressed syllable in a flash or to the dark. We've also got dactylic or dactyl is actually it. That's opposite of anapestic. It's stressed and then 2 unstressed syllables. Feverish, I go. And then we've got spondaic or the spondee, and that's 2 stressed syllables. I can't stop saying syllabus. I've got syllabus on the mind. Break, and cold gray stones. This commonly used set of feet is hard to maintain throughout an entire poem. And what you're going to find is that in Shakespeare, whether it's his sonnets or his play, he typically uses the iambic or I am, unstressed, stress syllable feats, and he usually uses pentameter, which we'll talk in just a moment. He will sometimes use trochaic though, and we'll talk about that more. So what is the I am? It's a metrical foot of 2 syllables where the accent lies on the second syllable. So you can think about it like tada, hello, avoid, the rush. That gets you into sort of the cadence of Shakespearean language and really the commonly used language of the time. And part of the reason that it's used, it's similar to a heartbeat. So you've got that ta-da, but it's also da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. So it's very human versus robotic. And consider the iambic pentameter, or I am, was considered by ancient Greeks to approximate the natural rhythm of speech instead of being something robotic. So often iambic meters, particularly in the past and even today, were used extensively for dramatic dialogue, invective speech or writing that abuses, denounces, or attacks, satire, and fables. You've got it's really well suited to the cadence of the English language. These iambic rhythms, especially iambic tetrameter and pentameter, which Shakespeare uses quite a bit, and are preeminent meters of English verse. So it works well. And then every so often, you'll have other types of feet substituted to add variety along with the iambic verse. Now, in terms of meter, meter refers to the measure of rhythm in a poem, and meter is usually defined by feet and the accent pattern within those feet. And there are 7 types of meter with a specific number of feet. So you've got, I'm not going to read this list to you because you can see it, but what I do want to highlight for you is that Shakespeare liked to stick in the tetrameter and pentameter with the 4 lines per feet or the 5 lines per feet. I'm sorry, 4 syllables per 4 syllable feet per line or 5 syllable feet per line. And that would be 8 syllables or 10 syllables altogether per line. So, to be fair, iambic pentameter was the predominant meter used in English verse since the 16th century. In English verse, in which pentameter has been the predominant meter, it's the preferred foot in the iamb, and that's the unstressed following by the stress. Very common form of poetry. Many of Shakespeare's works are in iambic pentameter, and it's a line of verse containing those 5 metrical feet. That's the pentameter part, and each foot has 2 syllables with the accent on the second syllables, the unaccented accented syllables, which is the iambic part, and that's what I've been talking about in the previous slides. So a couple of other notable authors of the time who used iambic pentameter: Geoffrey Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales as early as the 14th century. And then, although without as much regularity that is found in later, in the heroic couplets of John Dryden and Alexander Pope. And then we've got Sir Philip Sidney in Astrophil and Stella, a few works that you might be familiar with. Even some female Renaissance writers, yes, there were even female Renaissance writers employed the iambic pentameter as well. And one such person is Elizabeth Carey, who wrote the play, The Tragedy of Miriam, the Fairy Queen of Jewry. So that's fun news too. Most English sonnets and most of Shakespeare's plays are written in iambic pentameter. So here's the unstressed syllable, here's the stressed, these are the symbols. So you can see as you read it, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this and this gives life to thee. There's a natural built-in rhythm, and you'll notice that actors try to capture that rhythm and not make it super robotic, but they kind of keep that sing-songy unstressed stressed syllable as they read Shakespeare's lines. This is particularly true. The use of iambic pentameter is really highlighted in Shakespeare's tragedies. And he also uses blank verse there as well. So let's talk a little bit more about verse. It's simply a line of metrical writing, a line of poetry. And blank verse then is often unrhymed iambic pentameter, and it's the preeminent dramatic and narrative verse form in English writing. It's also the standard form for dramatic verse in Italian and German. It's considered a very rich and versatile type of verse. It depends on the skill of the poet in the varying of the stresses and the position of the caesura or the pause in each line, in catching the shifting tonal qualities and emotional overtones of the language, and in arranging lines into thought groups and paragraphs. Blank verse was adapted from unrhymed Greek and Latin heroic verse, and introduced in 16th century Italy along with other classic meters. And just Although he's not the first to use blank verse, Giovanni Rucellai used the writing of consecutive unrhymed verse in the didactic poem Le Api. And Rucellai was the first to use the term versi schilotti, which became translated into English as blank verse. And it soon became the standard meter of Italian Renaissance drama, used in such major works as the comedies of Ludovico Ariosto, La Minta, or Torquato Tasso, and the Tu Pastor Fido of Battista Guarini. So ultimately, blank verse is written in unrhymed iambic pentameter, and there's an example for you. I'm not going to get too much into this right now, but I think it's important to, I was going to not go that fast, to let you know a little bit about the Shakespearean sonnet, and the sonnet forms in general, but 14 lines. You can sort of read this, and that's usually just any sonnet form is 14 lines. And then we've got Italian sonnets. It's usually called the Petrarchan sonnet because Petrarch was he was considered to be the one to really be the master of this skill. And you can see what that looks like. And the only reason I want to bring up the English sonnet is because sonneteering was the time during Shakespeare's time. Writing plays was not considered to be that's not how you became known to be a writer, but the sonnets were. Poetry was. That's what put you on the map. So you'll notice that Shakespeare has 154 sonnet sequence. 100 and then 34 to 38 plays. He co-wrote some plays, and some folks don't always add in those extra 4 plays. But this is something for you to think about: the 3 quatrains, groups of 4 lines with a couplet with the 2 lines at the end. You can see what the rhyme scheme is. The volta, or the turn, the rhetorical shift or dramatic change in thought or emotion, usually occurs after 8 or 10 lines, and typically the couplet in Shakespeare is what sort of becomes the volta, because the response of the couplet kind of gives the final thoughts for the play of the rest of the quatrains. And then this gets you a little bit of information for the sonnet sequence. There's only a few of his sonnets that don't follow iambic pentameter exactly, or the Shakespearean sonnet form, that he is considered to be sort of the premier sonneteer of his times. And here's a little bit of information about the sonnets themselves. And when Francis Mears is a schoolmaster and cleric who wrote of Shakespeare's sonnets and called them sugar sonnets among his private friends. The publication, you can see when they were first published. There's some questions about the publication of Shakespeare's sonnets. They aren't titled, so were they published without his permission? Many have rearranged the sequence of the sonnets, so it's hard to know what Shakespeare's intentions were with that. And there are claims for when the sonnets were written that range between 1585 to 1609. Then we've also got these biographical pitfalls, the love triangle, when we look at Shakespeare's sonnets. He certainly is writing to a young man in sonnets 1 through 126, and a dark lady in sonnets 127 and 154. And many folks like to consider who that young man is, who that dark lady is. They like to put a biographical read to the poem, to the sonnets. There is a love triangle. There's certainly some passion and love toward the young man, certainly some love and passion toward the dark lady, some jealousy between the young man and the dark lady. So there's thoughts of a lot of queer theory critics like to really look into the different gender and sexual relationships and perhaps Shakespeare's bisexuality. Some see this doing too much of a biographical read as limiting the far-reaching nature of Shakespeare's poems and sonnets. Some see it as a real glimpse into his life, providing information that we wouldn't have otherwise. But I think it's always important to understand each author, and representation matters, right? And so to see that people how they were living and dealing with the confines of the society in which they lived in, whether it dealt with gender, sexuality, class, race, whatever it may be. And then here are the different themes that you can find not only in Shakespeare's sonnets, but also in Shakespeare's plays. Prose. So the reason I need to talk about prose is because there are times in Shakespeare's plays when the characters will speak in prose. And so it's the ordinary language. I'm speaking in prose right now, just the way that we speak, without rhyme, without meter, without any purposeful stressed or unstressed. And so it is the you can see, you can kind of read that slide for yourself too. In Shakespeare's language, we have a lot of freedom in his writing. He takes a lot of freedoms in his writing. He has he uses different dramatic language. Soliloquies can also be considered monologues, but they're usually spoken when the character believes that she or he is on stage alone and not being overheard. You've got voice, you've got antithesis, imagery, you've got ambiguity, contradiction, paradox, which is the seemingly absurd or self-contradictory statement or proposition that, when investigated or explained, may prove to be well-founded or true, such as "my weakness is my strength." Different repetition, rhyme, pronouns. We've got subject pronoun, how pronouns are used as the subject, or our pronoun, the you. Shakespeare uses thou as the object. Shakespeare uses for you, thee as the possessive adjective. For your, Shakespeare uses thy as the possessive noun. For yours, Shakespeare uses thine. We've also got syntax. That's the way that words are arranged, the phrases that create well-formed sentences in language. And then a lot of wordplay in Shakespeare. Witty, we've got puns, play on words that produce humorous effects by using a word that suggests two or more meanings, or by exploiting similar sounding words that have different meanings. The humor depends upon the ambiguities that the word entails, often relies on sound, such as with homonyms. You've got malapropisms. These are also the witty exploitation of meanings and ambiguities of words. Characters that use malapropisms accidentally make mistakes. They use one word instead of an intended other word, and often it shows their class standing, their level of education, but often their innocence as well. We are not going to do this today because we are doing this. I'm going to provide this link for you, so I hope you take some time to look over it. And then, ta-da! We are done. I hope you can enjoy this speaking in iambic pentameter. And if you want to try, I would love to try that with you in class. Looking forward to talking to you soon and seeing you soon. Take care.